We learned a lot of lessons at the feet of our grandparents. We also learned a lot in the pews of country churches and the desks of small schools. Verla Mooth learned a deep spiritual lesson in her schoolhouse-turned-church one Sunday back in the Great Depression. Verla remembers an unforgettable gift to a child.
My first awareness of the transforming power of faith in a higher power was revealed in a small two-room country schoolhouse when I was 5 years old. Technically speaking, the Great Depression was not yet upon us, but for the hill people of our rural Ozark Mountain region, depressed circumstances were an everyday fact of life. Part of our deprivation was not having a church to worship in, so the simple, hard-working folks gathered in the local schoolhouse. It was a non-denominational community service, and most of the time there wasn't even a preacher present. Sunday school was followed by singing and testimonies, people taking turns standing and sharing their faith. Those personal testimonies gave the country folks courage and faith to face the austerity of the coming week. It also provided them with fellowship and a chance to catch up on all of the local news. I remember it so vividly. It was a hot, humid summer day, and the windows were open to catch a breeze. For most of the morning I had been immersed in my own reflections. I especially liked to watch the babies as they nursed, their mothers discreetly covered with a cloth diaper or sunbonnet. Suddenly, my attention was diverted by a large horsefly that was trying to bite the mules tied right outside the window where I was sitting. The mules were impatiently switching their tails, trying to lash the horsefly away. As the buzzing continued, my eyes grew heavy. Testimony time lasted so long. I wondered how it was possible to survive so many trials as were being related. After the song leader sang a few more hymns, he asked Aunt Tilly Spencer to lead the congregation in prayer. I dutifully knelt and buried my face on the seat of the desk as I had been instructed, but it was hard to keep my thoughts from wandering as Aunt Tilly's plaintive voice droned on, for an eternity it seemed to me. It wasn't that I didn't like Aunt Tilly. She was a sweet woman, and she had an awful hard time trying to raise her family all by herself. She was a widow. Even now I would not dare guess how old Aunt Tilly was that summer day. She could have been 60, or she could have been 80. Her face was lined with deep furrows, indelible marks left behind by a life of toil and care. Her dry, wrinkled skin was tanned from long hours of exposure to the hot sun while she worked in the fields just like a man. Her hair was a mixture of black and gray, pulled tight in a twisted knot. Her print calico dress only accentuated the overall drabness of the picture. Aunt Tilly began her prayer by asking the Lord to bless the congregation, to supply our daily bread and refresh our dry land by sending a much-needed rain. I had heard that prayer many times before, even at my young age, and my thoughts were more on the horsefly that still buzzed outside the window. I sure wished that I could look, but I didn't dare. Then something happened that brought my head up, even though I'd always been told to keep my head bowed during prayer. It sounded like someone had cut right into Aunt Tilly's prayers. Mama had taught me it wasn't nice to talk when someone else was talking. I quickly glanced over to where Aunt Tilly was kneeling, and sure enough, she was still praying. But something was different. Aunt Tilly's face no longer looked tired and drained of energy. The defeated, weary look had vanished, and in its place her face wore a bright glow. She looked like the angel in our Sunday school paper. She was looking straight up toward heaven, as if she was beholding something no one else could see. She looked almost young, and she sure looked happy. I had never heard terms like mystical, ecstatic, or transforming power. I couldn't understand, but I kept looking at Aunt Tilly, spellbound. Even her voice was different. No longer weary-sounding, it was now filled with excitement and expectancy. I sure wished I could ask Mama or my Sunday school teacher what it meant, but then they would know that I had been peeking, and Mama would surely have disapproved of that. Besides, how could I explain what I'd seen? It was something like the way Mama looked when she told me she loved me and was real proud of me. It was like the happiness and contentment I felt when I'd gotten to go to town with Daddy that one time and take the strawberries to the market. He had bought me an ice cream cone, and as I licked it, the cold, delicious taste brought a look of utter rapture to my childish face. My experience was mine alone to cherish in silence. Almost 75 years have passed since that day so long ago when a small child received an unforgettable gift of seeing the transforming power of prayer on Aunt Tilly Spencer's face. I never forgot what I had received. It has formed me and enriched my life with faith. Even in the years when I grew world-weary and doubt almost gave way to despair, one thing I could never forget, that there is a Creator and that He has the power to transform darkness to light, despair to hope, weakness to strength, weariness to restfulness, and night to day. In short, prayer changes things. I am so thankful for the gift that little girl was given so long ago.
A relationship between a teacher and student can sometimes be that sort of love-hate kind of thing. You know, you just love to hate them, at least at times. Alan Sanderson remembers just that kind of relationship in The Principle of the Thing.
It's not school that I hate, goes the old joke. It's the principle of the thing. The thing was the brick two-story school where I obtained my elementary education. For many years, Dorothy Dame reigned indomitably as the principal. Even when I met this grand lady in her office, I was everlastingly impressed by her commanding presence. Of medium streamlined height, crowned by an upsweep in white, Mrs. Dame projected the authority and disciplined posture of a Marine drill sergeant. A look, a gesture, or a word given in reprimand would intimidate the unruliest of boys. Being sent to her office for some display of misconduct wasn't something one looked forward to. These were qualities I respected at a distance for some time, but upon entering the 8th grade, I quickly discovered that there were many other facets to her magnetic personality. At that time, she also held the lofty position of graduation teacher, and a teacher she was, first and last, in the true sense of the word. She possessed that rare ability of being able to transfer her knowledge to the budding minds of her students in the simplest of terms. Within that framework, I also came to know her warmth, humor, patience, and incisiveness as she spoon-fed me educational nuggets which became a firm base for all my later learning. She was well versed in any subject she taught, yet Mrs. Dame assumed nothing, especially any information we might have absorbed in the previous 7 grades. Her approach was to start with the fundamentals and proceed to the more difficult phases of the course as the year progressed. Our first arithmetic class had hardly begun when she chalked a double column of figures on the blackboard. Using a wooden pointer to touch each number, she called upon us to add aloud with her. We all started out in confident unison, but toward the end, Mrs. Dame's machine-gun-like voice was the only one to be heard. "Class, you're not with me," she ruefully reminded us. "No, I guess we weren't. I'm positive that I wasn't. The best I was ever able to do was accompany her rapid computations for about 5 digits. Because I like history, it came a little easier for me. Mrs. Dame enriched me with her detailed accounts of personages I might otherwise have known nothing about. She emphasized people like Kemal Ataturk of Turkey and Supreme Court Justice Roger B. Taney. They stand out among a score of names which still flash in my mind whenever I reminisce about my last days at that school. Long before the trend toward physical fitness, Mrs. Dame embarked upon her own program. It didn't matter what the temperature was outside. Each day had to begin by throwing open the windows and taking lung-bursting breaths of fresh air. So we wouldn't shiver too much, a series of brisk calisthenics followed. One set of exercises involved rotating of the neck muscles. According to Mrs. Dame, this area of the body was too often overlooked. With a cheerful smile that triggered a twinkle in her bespectacled eyes, our principal was constantly ready to help any of us with any sort of problem. Indeed, she solved most of them. Those she couldn't solve at least held the attention of her sympathetic ear. Such a teacher forever endears herself to her pupils. A special way of showing this devotion was to hang a May basket on her. On a day in that month, a group of boys and girls from the same class would get together and fill a large basket with fruit, candy, potato chips, and popcorn. To this was added wide sashes of bright ribbon tied in a bow and a card bearing the teacher's name and the appropriate sentiment. The basket would be deposited outside the classroom before school began. Then someone would rap loudly on the door. All those in on the basket would run and hide. After the teacher had recovered from the pleasant surprise, she'd delegate 3 or 4 of her remaining students to find those responsible. Naturally, all participants couldn't leave school property, but besides showing how we felt, we also had the satisfaction of postponing many a tough test. Mrs. Dame was honored annually, not by one, but by several baskets. If May was for baskets, April was the month in which the graduating class began rehearsals. The program, generally attracting uncounted standees behind many rows of seated spectators, was held on a stage erected in the first-floor hall. It was bad enough having to sit on this platform in uncomfortable new clothes and face such a large audience. On top of that, each of us had a poem to recite from memory at stage center. My piece was entitled, "God Give Us Men." The first practice didn't go too well, at least not for me. I'd memorized my lines well enough, but Mrs. Dame said she couldn't hear me beyond the 4th row. She wanted to catch every word distinctly as she stood behind the last row. When I protested that this was far removed from my capabilities, she suggested that I pretend to be calling for a ball at second base. By June, this bit of self-deception had enabled me to fulfill her request. The momentous date finally crawled into being. Our cue to enter the hall was a piano solo. Down the center aisle, behind the smallest girl in the class, who led the procession alone, I walked as the male half of the first couple. At a given signal from me, we parted to slowly ascend the stage from opposite ends. Once seated, I began to sweat out the weight to which I'd been sentenced. I arose rather uncertainly when my time to speak came. As my leaden feet came to a halt at the precise spot, I felt the hushed silence magnify the stares of all those in attendance. My throat went dry. I looked desperately for the help to endure my presentation. At the last moment, I remembered to glance into the left wing. There, true to her promise, stood Mrs. Dame, wearing a beautiful white dress, a red corsage, and a most encouraging smile. I fixed my eyes upon the rear windows and repeated the introduction she had mouthed from the paper clutched in her hand. Sooner than I'd thought possible, I was sitting down amidst the applause. My part was over. From that point on, I enjoyed myself immensely. The other deliveries and the awarding of diplomas were then a treat to hear. As I retraced my steps down the aisle with my partner, I couldn't help breaking into a joyful trot with the others a few feet from the door. Before I slipped through, however, I wanted a last glimpse of what had been my second home for so long. Instead, my eyes caught the sight of our beaming principal standing near the edge of the dais, proudly watching another set of her molded children depart toward their destiny. It was only then that I realized the penetrating loss of a great teacher and a good friend.
Sometimes lessons were learned on school buses. Ruth Cox Anderson taught a bully a lesson that stayed with him the rest of their school days together. See how that big boy learned to turn the other cheek.
It was a special day in September 1926, my first day of school. Our 13-acre farm, some 40 miles south of Columbus, Ohio, was on the line between 2 townships. One township had a one-room school, the other a consolidated school. In August, my father went to the courthouse and had our property transferred to the consolidated school district. Nevertheless, as I stood waiting to start the great adventure, 2 school buses came for me. Daddy talked to each driver and put me on the right bus. Mama cried. I couldn't imagine what about. I was thrilled with the idea of going to school. By the time I had been riding the school bus 2 weeks, I had a problem. An older boy, maybe 12 or 13, began to tease me. Looking back, I remember that he had 2 older sisters. I had charge of my younger brother after he was 11, and I remember him saying I was worse than his best friend's stepmother. The boy on the school bus had 2 older sisters, and maybe he'd thought teasing a little girl would make up for it. But such a thought certainly never entered my 6-year-old brain. Once I was on the school bus, this older boy would begin telling the whole busload of kids how crazy I was about him, how much I loved him, thought him handsome. He would rattle on until we reached the school. I would furiously deny everything he said, getting angrier and angrier. The other kids would laugh or smile and enjoy the whole exchange. One afternoon, I went home from school and told my daddy, "You will have to go to school, complain to the principal, and have him give that boy a good calling down." Daddy had been figuring or something. He had a pencil in his hand. He poked the eraser end into his chin dimple and seemed to ponder. "Well," I asked, "will you go to school and talk to the principal?" "I don't think so," Daddy said. "I won't always be around when you have to deal with boys, so I think I'd better just tell you how to cope with this yourself." I wasn't very pleased. Daddies, I thought, were supposed to handle anything that annoyed their little girls. "Here's what you're to do," Daddy said. "When you get on the school bus and the boy says, 'Ruth loves me, she's crazy about me,' you are to say, 'Yes, I do love you dearly. I'm crazy about you.' Rush right over and sit down beside him, as close as you can get. Say, 'I want to sit by you all the way to school. I'm going to give you a kiss.' Then kiss his cheek once or twice." "Daddy," I screamed, "how can I do that?" "When you kiss him, close your eyes and pretend you're kissing one of your uncles. His cheek will feel about the same." Daddy smiled as if an amusing thought had come to him, and, as he turned back to his work, said, "He likely won't be the last boy you'll ever kiss." I was practically in shock, but I'd been taught to mind my daddy. So the next morning, when I stepped on the bus and the boy said, "Here she comes, a little girl that is crazy, crazy about me," I rushed over and sat down beside him and practically yelled, "You're right, I love you, and I'm going to kiss you right now." I closed my eyes and planted a real smacker on his cheek. Daddy was right. This teaser's cheek felt no different than my uncle's. The school bus literally shook with outbursts of laughter. Kids were laughing uproariously the whole 3 miles to the schoolhouse and most of the way into school. My daddy was smart. The boy never spoke to me again, even though we lived in the same community for several years. If I came near him, he turned and walked away. That wasn't the last time I kissed a boy. My daddy was right about that, too.
One thing H.R. Groves never could learn in school was how to sharpen a pencil. That took a sure hand, a keen eye, and a sharp penknife. Now, H.R. may have had all of those, but for some reason he liked it better when his pretty teacher sharpened his pencil for him. Head back to the country school as H.R. recalls penknives and teachers.
In the early 1920s, schools didn't have pencil sharpeners. Instead, penknives were used to shape the end of a quill into a point for writing with ink, or to shave the end of a pencil to reveal the black graphite tip. Not all primary students carried their own penknives. Many had to rely on using teachers. If they were clumsy enough, like me, they got teacher to sharpen them. But I had a special reason for my inability to use a penknife. Her name was Miss Fowler. She was a very slight, quite youthful lady who had nice eyes that smiled at us. I don't know if that was rare among teachers, but I remember Miss Fowler's eyes and the scent of violets. I also seem to remember her white, wide-brimmed hats, but to be sure, nearly all hats then were of soft white leghorn and wide-brimmed. She was quiet, with a gentle voice and gentle hands, too. I know I learned eagerly from her. Looking up to her and growing in knowledge were one. I particularly remember her for a skill her hands could perform. In the primary grades, we still use slates for arithmetic and other wipe-away stuff, but we use scribblers too, for notes, nature study, history, and geography. That meant pencils, and pencils often needed sharpening. To sharpen a pencil, you used a penknife. If you were a real independent kid, you carried a hefty jackknife, a two-blader, and you could whittle sticks and point up pencils as if you were born to do it. But most of us didn't own a knife. We raised our hand and asked to use the teacher's special penknife. It was special because it had tortoise-shell handles. There was no other like it, and she kept it in her desk drawer. We went to the front with our pencils to sharpen the points. Now, I was about the most awkward pencil sharpener you'd ever find. I looked like I was going to stick my finger every time. I dug into the wood nearly at right angles. I could never get a slope to it. Then I shaved the lead to a twisty point like a demented gimlet. Miss Fowler observed my weakness. She nearly always took time from whatever she was doing to sharpen a broken point for us, if we couldn't do it well. I can still see her slender, tapered fingers. She held pencil and blade together gently, left-hand fingers underneath, right-hand fingers drawing the blade toward the cedar sheath, point toward her. Stroke, 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 and the lead appeared. Stroke, stroke, and wooden lead continued as one, an elegant tapered point with no jag showing, feathered to the very tip. Did anybody else have a teacher who could sharpen a pencil like that? I didn't believe so. I never wore the lead down to a nub like many kids did. I could never get it to last. Mine always broke in a couple of days. I have wondered since if Miss Fowler ever caught on. Having her sharpen my pencil was far more rewarding than using it dull. Please, teacher, my pencil's broken. With such a fine point, tapered, feathered, what could a boy not write?
Some lessons were learned out of the classroom. Richard Vath remembers an annual summer outing that taught him the value of close family ties in Me and Bill.
My brother Bill and I loved holidays. He was 3 years older than I was, and for years it was just me and Bill. Summer in Cincinnati, the Queen City on the banks of the Ohio River, offered July 4th with fireworks and Labor Day, but that meant school was beginning soon. One holiday topped them all, Procter & Gamble Day at Coney Island. Aunt Edith worked in Procter & Gamble and took me and Bill to the awesome amusement park. It was always the highlight of our summer. While we dressed and ate breakfast, Mother packed a lunch. When we were ready, Mother reminded us, "Don't forget to go to the bathroom." Then we all took off, me and Bill carrying the basket, as Mother warned us repeatedly not to drop it. We waited for the trolley with the two poles that connected it to the electricity overhead. Sometimes boys snuck up behind the trolley and pulled a pole away from the power source. Then, when the car didn't move, the conductor would jump off shouting, "Those dang kids," and mutter about what he would do if he ever caught them. When everyone was aboard, and if some dang fool kid hadn't slipped the power pole off the line, we began our adventure. Soon, Aunt Edith boarded. She was a merry soul with a grand sense of humor. As the trolley swayed and bumped its way downtown, I eyed my aunt's purse. It held the tickets for the rides. All P&G employees received some tickets, but some who didn't have children gave theirs to Aunt Edith. When the trolley finally reached downtown, we dragged the picnic basket off, warned for the umpteenth time not to drop it. There the Island Queen was docked. I was awed by the huge side-wheeler with 5 decks. Every summer the Queen steamed between downtown Cincinnati and Coney Island 6 days a week. The Packet was a stately lady, shimmering white with red, gold, and black trim. Her twin smokestacks belched smoke that streamed behind. The pilot house was off limits to everyone except the pilot, who stood in grandeur at his huge spoked wheel. He knew every inch of the river, and no one questioned his authority. When the gangplank swung ashore, we crossed it to explore the Queen's mysteries. In the engine room, we stared at the machinery. Tremendous steam power drove pistons that rotated giant paddle wheels. At rest, they were impressive, but once the behemoth started to move, it was almost terrifying. Such power, such force, such majesty. The top deck offered a commanding view as the calliope played cheerfully. A large, shiny brass bell rang to announce the Packet's sailing. Huge hawsers were cast off, and the Packet was freed of its tie. In the engine room, the ponderous pistons turned like two giant muscular arms, backing the boat away from the shore. Daytime cruises were mostly for families. Young couples took moonlight cruises, when an orchestra played romantic music and a young blonde singer named Doris Kappelhoff sang. She later was known as Doris Day. On the top deck, we pointed out landmarks to everyone. This same habit once embarrassed my father when he and Mother were taking a cruise and met two elderly widows from Atlanta, Georgia. As the boat neared Cincinnati, my father excitedly said, "See that white house under the flagpole? That's the birthplace of one of America's greatest generals, President Ulysses S. Grant." A deafening silence prevailed as the Southern ladies stiffened, glaring at my father. Mark Twain once said that his favorite profession was steamboating on the Mississippi. My father loved boating too. He told stories of trips he'd taken when he was young, how he'd boarded in Cincinnati and headed downriver to Madison, Indiana, to his uncle's farm. He spoke of boats zigzagging down the waterway, dropping off people and cargo, the stevedores singing as they worked. My father called this his romance of the river, and it sounded like heaven to my young ears. On Sundays, we picnicked and watched sternwheelers and sidewheelers navigate the ribbon of water. My father's eyes glistened as he talked about a world of ships with sails full blown racing over blue oceans, of pirates and buccaneers, of wood-burning ships like the Robert E. Lee churning through America's waterways, and of Mark Twain piloting up and down the mighty Mississippi. As we rounded a bend in the river, we could see a sign that read Coney Island. The original Coney Island in New York had been named after Mr. Conants, who owned that land. Thus, it was Conan's Island. But many thought our island was named Coney because there were so many rabbits, or conies, running around. Once the captain had eased the Queen up to the ramp, the crew lowered the gangway and secured the hawsers to pilings, wharfing the ship out of the current. We clutched the picnic hamper and crossed the gangplank. We had arrived. We ate our picnic lunch, and then our biggest decision was which ride to ride first. We rode the Crazy House, Shoot the Chutes, the Carousel, Roller Coaster, and Dodgems, with time out for candy, ice cream, and soda pop. Aunt Edith rode with us while Mother guarded the precious hamper. When it was time to head home, we moved slowly, our energies spent. The empty hamper weighed a ton. Aboard the Queen, me and Bill watched the pistons in the engine room, but we didn't climb to the top deck. As we disembarked, couples on shore waited to board for an evening of dance and romance. We fell asleep on the trolley's wooden seats, then woke up to thank Aunt Edith. Finally, we staggered off at our stop as Mother repeated her mantra, "Don't forget the basket." Trudging into the house, we assured Dad that it had been the best P&G day ever. Then, with our soiled clothes littering the floor, we said our prayers and toppled into bed as memories of the day danced in our minds. Today, our outing seems tame, but it was the best day of our year. They're all gone now. Mother, Dad, Aunt Edith, and Bill, too. But I see them very clearly in my mind's eye, and I wish we could just have one more day on that boat and that magical island. Coney Island is gone, and a new packet plies the river. Maybe someday I'll board the new Island Queen to relive simpler days when life wasn't so complicated, and the biggest decision I had to make was which ride to go on first.